March 15, 2024. Biscayne Bay, Miami. The morning fishermen casting their lines into the crystal blue waters had no idea they were about to discover something that would haunt them forever. What bobbed to the surface that sunny Friday morning would expose a love triangle that ended in the most brutal betrayal South Florida had ever witnessed. Maria Santos's wedding ring caught the morning sunlight as it floated just beneath the waves, still attached to the severed hand of a woman who had traded her marriage vows for promises of paradise. The 29-year-old had abandoned her devoted husband 3 months earlier for a billionaire from Dubai, believing she was escaping poverty for a life of luxury. She was wrong. Today we uncover the twisted path that led from a modest apartment in Homestead to the morgue in Miami, and the man who made sure Maria would never see another sunrise. Welcome to True Crime Actual, where we reveal the darkest truths hiding behind perfect facades. Maria Elena Santos was 24 when she first met Jake Morrison at a community college in South Miami. She was studying business administration while working nights at a local diner to pay for school. Jake was taking evening classes in automotive repair while working days at his uncle's garage in Little Havana. Their first conversation happened during a break between classes. Maria was stressed about her accounting homework, and Jake offered to help. What started as study sessions in the library turned into long walks around campus and late dinners at cheap restaurants near school. Jake fell hard and fast. Maria was everything he wasn't. Smart, ambitious, and determined to build something better than the life she'd grown up with. Her family had immigrated from Colombia when she was 8, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had already overcome major obstacles. For Jake, Maria represented hope. His own background was simple. Working-class family from rural Florida, high school education, and a job that paid the bills but offered little excitement. Maria made him feel like he could be part of something bigger, something important. Their relationship moved quickly. Jake would pick her up after her evening shifts at the diner, driving his old pickup truck through Miami traffic while she talked about her classes, her dreams of opening her own business, her plans to make something of herself. One day, she would tell him as they sat on the beach watching the sunset, "We're going to have a house with an ocean view. You'll see." Jake believed every word. He started working overtime, picking up weekend shifts, saving every dollar he could. Maria's education wasn't cheap, and her family couldn't help much financially. But Jake saw it as an investment in their future together. The proposal came during Maria's final semester. Jake had saved for 8 months to afford the ring. Nothing spectacular, but real diamonds from a reputable jeweler. He chose the beach where they'd had their first real date, getting down on one knee as the sun set over Biscayne Bay. Maria said yes, but even then Jake should have noticed something. The way she looked around to see who was watching before she kissed him. The careful way she photographed the ring before calling her family. The slight hesitation in her voice when she said, "Of course." Marriage changed everything, though not in the ways Jake had expected. Maria graduated with honors in May 2022, and suddenly their small apartment felt even smaller. Her diploma hung on the wall next to Jake's high school certificate, a constant reminder of the gap between their achievements. Maria's job search was brutal. The economy was tough and entry-level business positions were scarce. Months passed with nothing but rejection letters and automated responses. Meanwhile, Jake's salary at the garage barely covered their rent, utilities, and Maria's student loan payments. The stress began to show in small ways. Maria stopped cooking the Colombian dishes she'd made during their dating years. She spent hours on her laptop, applying for jobs and comparing herself to former classmates who had landed positions at big companies. Their conversations became shorter, focused on bills and practical matters rather than dreams. Jake tried to compensate by working longer hours. He picked up side jobs, fixing cars for neighbors on nights and weekends. The extra income helped, but it meant less time together. Their first real fight happened on a Tuesday evening in September. Maria had been turned down for a position at a marketing firm, her dream job. She came home to find Jake celebrating a small raise at the garage. "Jake, I have classmates making $60,000 a year at consulting firms. I have friends working for major corporations," she said, her voice sharp with frustration. The words hung between them like a slap. Jake tried to explain that every bit helped, that they were building something together, that her career would take off soon. But Maria had already turned away, disappearing into their bedroom and closing the door. That night marked the beginning of a slow breakdown. Maria became distant, distracted. She would take phone calls in the bathroom, claiming they were potential employers or networking contacts. Her laptop gained a password Jake didn't know. She started attending evening events. Alumni mixers, professional development seminars, networking functions at various hotels around Miami. Jake wanted to trust her. Maria had always been social, always networking. It was part of building a career. But the late nights became more frequent, and her explanations became more vague. The irony was that just as their marriage began to crumble, Jake's career started to improve. His raise led to more responsibility at the garage. He was finally earning enough to consider moving to a better apartment, maybe even starting a family. But Maria seemed less interested in their future with each passing week. By December 2022, they were essentially living separate lives in their small apartment. Jake would leave for work in the morning. Maria would spend the day job hunting or attending networking events. They'd pass each other in the hallway, exchange pleasantries over dinner, and retreat to opposite ends of their couch for the evening. Jake knew something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. Maria was still beautiful, still intelligent, still the woman he'd fallen in love with. But she felt like a stranger wearing his wife's face. The first sign that Maria was living a double life came in January 2023. Jake was doing laundry when he found a receipt in Maria's purse. Dinner for two at Joe's Stone Crab, one of the most expensive restaurants in Miami Beach. The total was more than they spent on groceries in a month. When Jake asked about it, Maria's explanation was smooth and practiced. A networking dinner with a potential mentor, someone who might help with job opportunities. The older woman had insisted on paying, but Maria's card was charged by mistake. They were working on getting it reversed. Jake wanted to believe her. The alternative was too painful to consider. But he started paying attention in ways he hadn't before. Maria's wardrobe had improved dramatically over the past few months. Dresses he'd never seen before. Shoes that looked expensive. Jewelry that hadn't come from their modest savings. "My sister sent some things," Maria would say when Jake noticed, or, "It was on sale," or, "I borrowed it from Carmen," referring to her college roommate who now worked at a bank downtown. The lies multiplied. Maria's phone buzzed constantly with messages she would glance at and quickly dismiss. She started carrying a second phone. For job applications, she explained, though Jake had never seen her use it for any calls he could hear. Their physical relationship, already strained by stress and exhaustion, virtually disappeared. Maria was always too tired, too worried about interviews the next day, too distracted by applications and networking events. Jake began to feel like he was married to a ghost. Maria was physically present but emotionally absent, living in their apartment but not really with him. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started, and what happens next will leave you questioning everything you think you know about love and betrayal. The turning point came in March 2023. Jake's boss offered him a promotion to shop manager, a move that would increase his salary by 40%. It was the break they'd been waiting for, the chance to finally get ahead financially and maybe save their marriage. Jake came home that evening with flowers and takeout from Maria's favorite Cuban restaurant. He found her sitting at their small dining table, staring at her phone with an expression he'd never seen before. Not stress or disappointment, but something that looked like excitement. "Maria, I have incredible news," he started, setting down the food and reaching for her hand. She pulled away instinctively, putting her phone face down on the table. "What is it?" she asked, but Jake could tell her attention was still on whatever she'd been looking at. As Jake explained the promotion, the salary increase, the possibilities it opened up for them, Maria nodded and made appropriate sounds of enthusiasm. But her responses felt hollow, automatic. When he finished talking, she hugged him briefly and said all the right words about being proud and excited. But Jake noticed she never asked about the details, never wanted to celebrate, never seemed truly happy about news that would change both their lives. That night, after Maria fell asleep, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling and wondering when he had become a stranger in his own marriage. The woman beside him felt like someone he'd never met, someone wearing his wife's face but harboring secrets he couldn't begin to guess. He had no idea how right he was, and he had no idea that Maria's secrets would soon destroy everything they'd built together. Omar Hassan al-Rashid was everything Maria had dreamed of during those long nights in her cramped homestead apartment. Heir to a real estate fortune that stretched across the Middle East, educated at Harvard Business School, fluent in 5 languages, and possessed of the kind of casual wealth that turned life into a series of pleasant experiences rather than difficult choices. Their first meeting was arranged through channels Maria would later describe as professional networking, though the reality was far more calculated. The Miami Business Development Council maintained connections with various international investors, and Maria had volunteered to help coordinate a seminar on global markets. Omar was in Miami for a 2-month visit, ostensibly to explore investment opportunities, but really to escape the pressure of family expectations in Dubai. Maria caught his attention immediately. Not just her beauty, though she was undeniably striking with her dark hair and bright smile, but her intelligence. She spoke Spanish and English fluently, understood business concepts that impressed him, and carried herself with the poise of someone who belonged in professional circles. Their first conversation lasted 4 hours after the seminar ended. While other attendees filtered out of the hotel conference room, Maria and Omar discussed everything from international trade to Colombian culture. He was charmed by her background, her immigrant story, her determination to build a successful career. "You should visit Dubai," he told her as the evening wound down. "We have many opportunities for someone with your skills and ambition." Maria laughed, thinking he was being polite. "I'm afraid my husband and I can't afford that kind of travel right now." Omar's expression didn't change, but Maria noticed he didn't mention her husband again for the rest of their conversation. And when he handed her his card, heavy paper with gold lettering, he held her hand just a moment longer than necessary. The text started the next day. Innocent at first. Thanks for a lovely evening, thoughts about their conversation, recommendations for books he thought she might enjoy. Maria responded because it felt professional, networking with someone who could potentially help her career. But Omar was playing a longer game. He understood seduction in ways that went far beyond physical attraction. He recognized Maria's frustration with her circumstances, her hunger for a life that matched her education and ambitions. And he began to offer her glimpses of what that life could look like. The first gift arrived at her apartment on a Thursday afternoon while Jake was at work. A book about international business, with a note expressing hope that she might find it useful. Maria told herself it was a thoughtful gesture between colleagues, nothing more. The second gift was flowers. Expensive orchids that cost more than Maria and Jake's weekly grocery budget, delivered to their door with a card thanking her for her insights on Latin American markets. Maria threw away the card before Jake came home, telling herself she was avoiding unnecessary questions. The third gift was an invitation. Omar would be attending a private art exhibition in Coral Gables, followed by dinner at a restaurant Maria had only read about in magazines. Would she like to join him? Purely professional, of course, an opportunity to discuss potential career paths in international business. Maria stared at the invitation for an hour before responding. She knew it was dangerous. She knew she was married. She knew Jake was working extra shifts to build a better future for them. But she also knew this might be her only chance to glimpse the world she dreamed about during all those years of studying and planning and hoping. One evening. What harm could one evening do? Maria's first evening with Omar was a revelation. The art exhibition was held in a private gallery in Coral Gables, attended by business leaders, cultural figures, and the kind of people Maria had only read about in business magazines. She found herself discussing international markets with a former ambassador, debating investment strategies with a real estate developer, and trading stories about business school with a woman who worked for a major consulting firm. This was the world Maria belonged in. Not a cramped apartment where she had to worry about whether they could afford to eat out. Not a life where her husband's modest promotion felt like a major victory. Here, surrounded by people who understood business as more than just a job, Maria felt truly alive for the first time in months. Omar was the perfect companion. Attentive without being possessive, knowledgeable without being condescending. He introduced her to everyone as my brilliant friend Maria, making sure she was included in every conversation, deferring to her expertise on Latin American markets when the topic arose. Dinner afterward was at Zuma, a restaurant Maria had fantasized about but never dreamed of actually entering. Omar ordered wine that cost more than Jake's weekly salary, and Maria found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. The conversation flowed effortlessly between business, culture, travel, and dreams. You're wasted in Miami, Omar told her as they shared dessert. I mean that in the most respectful way. Your talents, your education, your perspective. You should be in New York or London or Dubai, somewhere that appreciates what you have to offer. Maria felt a flutter of possibility in her chest. It's not that simple. I have responsibilities here. Responsibilities? Omar repeated thoughtfully. Of course. Your husband works in automotive repair, you mentioned. Maria nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. An honorable profession, Omar continued. But surely he would want you to pursue opportunities that match your potential. A man who truly loves his wife wants her to flourish, not limit herself. The words stayed with Maria during the Uber ride home. Jake was already asleep when she arrived, exhausted from another long day at the garage. She stood in their bathroom looking at herself in the mirror and trying to reconcile the woman who had spent the evening discussing international business with executives with the woman who shared a small apartment and worried about electric bills. The text from Omar arrived the next morning. Thank you for a perfect evening. I hope it was the first of many. Maria stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you. It was enlightening. She told herself she would be more careful going forward. She would maintain appropriate boundaries. She would remember her marriage vows and her commitment to Jake. But Omar made it impossibly easy to rationalize each step away from her old life. The second dinner led to a third. Business events led to private art viewings. Professional networking led to personal conversations about dreams, disappointments, and the roads not taken. Each encounter was more intimate than the last, though Omar never pushed too hard or moved too fast. He understood that Maria needed to convince herself that each boundary crossed was her own choice, her own decision to reach for something better. The gifts became more frequent and more personal. A silk scarf from Italy, earrings that complemented her eyes, a handbag that cost more than Maria's monthly student loan payment. Each came with a note that was just ambiguous enough to seem innocent while making Maria feel special, chosen, valued. Maria became an expert at hiding her double life. She created elaborate stories about networking events and professional development opportunities. She opened a separate email account and bought a prepaid phone for her communications with Omar. She learned to time her departures and returns to minimize Jake's questions. The lies came so easily that Maria surprised herself. She had always prided herself on her honesty, her integrity. But the life Omar offered felt so right, so aligned with who she really was, that deceiving Jake began to feel almost justified. Wasn't she just protecting him from truths he wouldn't understand? Jake, meanwhile, was working harder than ever. The promotion at the garage required longer hours and more responsibility, but he threw himself into the work with enthusiasm. Finally, he could provide for Maria the way she deserved. Finally, they could start planning for the future they dreamed about. He had no idea that Maria was already planning a very different future, one that didn't include him at all. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. What happens next will shock you to your core. The relationship between Maria and Omar crossed into physical intimacy on a rainy Tuesday evening in June. Maria had told Jake she was attending a business conference at a downtown hotel. Not entirely a lie, since Omar had invited her to a private reception for international investors. But after the reception, instead of returning to Homestead, Maria found herself in Omar's penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. The space was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay and furnishings that belonged in a magazine. I've been thinking about our conversation last week, Omar said, pouring champagne that Maria knew she shouldn't drink. About your future, about what you really want from life. Maria had been thinking about it too. More than thinking, obsessing. The contrast between her two lives had become unbearable. During the day, she was trapped in a cycle of job rejections and financial stress. But in the evenings with Omar, she was the woman she'd always wanted to be. Sophisticated, valued, living the life her education had prepared her for. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted, accepting the champagne and moving to the window. The view was breathtaking. The city spread out below like a glittering carpet of possibilities. "I think you do know," Omar said, joining her at the window. "I think you've always known. You just haven't given yourself permission to admit it." What happened next felt inevitable, though Maria would spend weeks afterward trying to pinpoint the exact moment she made the choice to betray her marriage. Was it when Omar kissed her as they watched the lights of Miami? Was it when she kissed him back? Or was it earlier? The first time she accepted his invitation, the first gift she kept secret, the first lie she told Jake. The physical betrayal was devastating enough, but what followed was even worse. As Maria lay in Omar's arms, looking out at a view of the city she'd never be able to afford, she realized she didn't feel guilty. She felt free. For the first time in months, she felt like herself. Omar understood her silence. "You don't have to go back," he said quietly. "Not to that life, not to those limitations. Come with me to Dubai. I can offer you everything you've dreamed of. A career with real influence, travel, culture, respect for your intelligence and abilities." Maria closed her eyes and tried to picture returning to Homestead, to the cramped apartment and mounting bills and Jake's excited updates about incremental progress at the garage. The image felt like a prison sentence. "What about Jake?" she whispered. "What about him?" Omar's voice was gentle but firm. "Maria, you're 29 years old. You have decades ahead of you. Do you want to spend them settling for less than you deserve out of guilt? Or do you want to build the life you were meant to live?" Maria didn't answer that night, but Omar didn't push for an immediate response. He understood that the decision had already been made in her heart. Now she just needed time to find the courage to act on it. The weeks that followed were torture for Maria. She continued her double life, but the contrast between her two worlds became more painful each day. At home, Jake talked enthusiastically about the vacation they could finally afford to take, the possibility of moving to a bigger apartment, maybe even starting a family soon. Each conversation felt like a knife twist. Jake was building dreams on a foundation that no longer existed. Maria had already left their marriage emotionally. She was just trying to find the right moment to leave physically. The decision was ultimately made for her. Omar's business in Miami was concluding, and he would be returning to Dubai within the month. Maria had to choose: return to her old life permanently or take the leap into something completely new. The night before Omar's scheduled departure, Maria made her choice. She would go with him to Dubai. She would finally claim the life she deserved, even if it meant destroying the life she'd built with Jake. She just had to figure out how to tell her husband that their marriage was over. Jake Morrison wasn't a suspicious man by nature. His small-town Florida upbringing had instilled in him a default trust in people, especially those closest to him. But by the summer of 2023, even Jake couldn't ignore the evidence accumulating before his eyes. It started with small inconsistencies in Maria's stories. She would mention attending events that he later discovered had been canceled. She would reference conversations with colleagues whose names never appeared in her phone contacts. Her explanations for expensive items became more elaborate and less believable. The breakthrough came on a Wednesday evening in late June. Maria had claimed she would be at a business networking dinner, but when Jake tried to reach her around 9 to coordinate picking up groceries, her phone went straight to voicemail. Concerned, he called the hotel where the dinner was supposedly taking place. No reservation under Maria's name. No private event scheduled for that evening. No record of any business networking gatherings. Jake sat in their apartment for 2 hours trying to come up with innocent explanations. Maybe Maria had gotten the hotel name wrong. Maybe the event had been moved last minute. Maybe there was some confusion about the details. But when Maria returned home just after midnight, her explanations didn't add up. The venue had changed locations at the last minute, she claimed. Her phone had died. The dinner had run much later than expected because of networking opportunities. Jake wanted to believe her, but Maria's behavior when she came home troubled him deeply. She went straight to the bathroom for a long shower without kissing him hello. She seemed energized rather than tired, despite claiming to have had a long, exhausting evening. And when she got into bed, she smelled like cologne. Expensive cologne that Jake had never worn. The next morning, Jake made a decision that went against every principle he'd held about marriage and trust. He decided to follow Maria. Her first stop was a coffee shop near the university where she met a woman Jake didn't recognize. They talked for about 30 minutes, and Jake could see Maria showing her pictures on her phone, both women laughing and gesturing excitedly. When they parted, Maria didn't head toward any job interviews or networking events. Instead, she went to Aventura Mall. Jake watched from a distance as his wife spent nearly 2 hours shopping in some of the most expensive stores in the mall. She emerged with several bags and the confident stride of someone who hadn't worried about price tags. The total value of her purchases would have covered their rent for a month. That evening, Maria showed Jake a single modest blouse she claimed to have found on sale at Target. The other items were nowhere to be seen. Jake's surveillance became a daily routine. He would leave for work at his normal time, then take breaks to check on Maria's activities. The pattern that emerged was devastating. His wife was living an entirely separate life, one that involved expensive restaurants, luxury shopping, and increasingly frequent meetings with a man Jake didn't recognize. The man was clearly wealthy. Jake first spotted him at a high-end restaurant in South Beach, where Maria appeared completely at ease among the well-dressed diners. The man was tall, well-dressed, and treated Maria with the familiarity of someone who knew her intimately. When he placed his hand on the small of her back to guide her to their table, Maria didn't pull away. Jake researched the man obsessively. Photos from social media and business publications revealed Omar Hassan al-Rashid, heir to a Dubai-based real estate fortune. The kind of wealth that made Jake's middle-class salary look like pocket change. The discovery should have prompted Jake to confront Maria immediately. Instead, it paralyzed him. How could he compete with a billionaire? How could he offer Maria anything that would compare to the life Omar could provide? Jake began to understand why Maria had become distant. Why would she be satisfied with takeout Cuban food when she could dine at the city's finest restaurants? Why would she be content with their cramped apartment when she could live in luxury? Why would she choose him when she could have everything? The realization broke something fundamental inside Jake. He had sacrificed everything for Maria's dreams, only to discover that her dreams no longer included him. Worse, she had been lying to him for months, living a double life while he worked exhausting hours to build their future together. But Jake didn't confront Maria. Not yet. Instead, he began to plan. If Maria wanted to abandon their marriage for a wealthy businessman, that was her choice. But she wasn't going to walk away unscathed. She wasn't going to destroy his life and simply disappear into luxury without consequences. Jake began documenting everything. He photographed Maria entering expensive hotels with Omar. He saved screenshots of her social media posts that didn't match her claimed whereabouts. He compiled receipts and bank statements that proved she was spending money she couldn't possibly have earned. Most importantly, Jake visited an insurance agent. If Maria was planning to leave him for another man, he wanted to ensure he wouldn't be left completely destitute. A substantial life insurance policy would provide some financial security if their marriage ended in divorce. The insurance agent was helpful and professional. $1 million in coverage would cost several hundred per month in premiums, but it would protect Jake's financial future. The policy would take effect immediately, with Jake as the sole beneficiary. When Maria finally decided to leave, Jake would be prepared. He would have evidence of her infidelity for the divorce proceedings. He would have financial protection through the insurance policy. And he would have months of documented proof of her betrayal to present to anyone who questioned his version of events. What Jake didn't fully admit to himself was that he was also preparing for a very different kind of outcome. Because deep in his heart, he knew that watching Maria walk away with another man might be more than he could bear. And if she couldn't be his wife, maybe she couldn't be anyone else's either. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you think you know about love and revenge. The confrontation Jake had been dreading came on a sweltering Thursday evening in July. Maria arrived home later than usual, carrying herself with a mixture of determination and guilt that Jake recognized immediately. She had made a decision and she was finally ready to share it with him. Jake was sitting at their small dining table, surrounded by the evidence of Maria's double life. Bank statements showing unexplained deposits, photographs printed from his surveillance, screenshots of social media posts that contradicted her claimed activities. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but he still felt completely unprepared. "Jake, we need to talk," Maria said, setting down her purse and avoiding his eyes. "Yes, we do," Jake replied quietly. His voice was steadier than he felt. Maria sat across from him, noticing but not commenting on the papers spread across the table. "This isn't easy to say, but I haven't been happy. For months now, I felt like we're living different lives, wanting different things. And I've met someone who understands what I need, what I want from life." Jake listened without interrupting as Maria explained about Omar, about the opportunities waiting for her in Dubai, about the life she could have if she was brave enough to take it. She spoke about international careers and cultural experiences and the chance to finally use her education in meaningful ways. What she didn't mention was love. She talked about opportunity, about compatibility, about shared interests and similar goals. But she never said she loved Omar. And she never said she had stopped loving Jake. "I see," Jake said when Maria finished her prepared speech. "And what about our marriage? Our vows? The sacrifices I made to put you through school?" Maria's composed facade cracked slightly. "I know you sacrificed for me. I know you've been a good husband. But Jake, that doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my entire life out of gratitude. I'm still young. I have decades ahead of me. I can't spend them settling for less than I deserve." "Less than you deserve," Jake repeated slowly. "So our marriage, our life together, that was settling?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Maria? Because from where I sit, it sounds like you've decided that the man who worked 16-hour days to pay for your education, who took on debt to support your dreams, who built his entire life around making you happy, that man isn't good enough anymore. Not now that you've found someone richer." Maria's temper flared. "This isn't about money. This is about compatibility, about shared values, about having a partner who understands my ambitions." "Your ambitions?" Jake said, gesturing to the evidence spread across the table. "You mean your ambition to lie to your husband for months while carrying on an affair? Your ambition to live a double life funded by another man? Your ambition to commit adultery while I work to build our future?" Maria stared at the photographs and documents, realizing for the first time that Jake knew everything. Her face went pale, but she didn't deny the accusations. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough," Jake replied. "Long enough to understand that the woman I married doesn't exist anymore. Long enough to see that you're willing to destroy everything we built together without a moment's hesitation." "Jake, I never meant for it to happen this way." "But you're not sorry it did happen this way, are you? You're not sorry you met him. You're not sorry you chose him over me. You're just sorry you got caught." Maria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm leaving with him tomorrow. He's arranged for a private jet to Dubai. I can have a career there, a real career, not just endless rejections and entry-level positions." "And what about me?" Jake asked. "What about the man who gave you everything?" "You can rebuild," Maria said, though she couldn't meet his eyes. "You're young. You have a good job now. You can find someone who appreciates what you have to offer." "Someone who appreciates mediocrity, you mean? Someone who doesn't require a billionaire to be satisfied?" Maria stood up abruptly. "I'm going to pack. I'll arrange for the rest of my things to be picked up later." Jake watched her disappear into their bedroom, listened to the sounds of suitcases being filled with the life they had built together. When she emerged an hour later, she looked like a stranger. Perfectly composed, elegantly dressed, already mentally divorced from everything they had shared. "I'll file for divorce once I'm settled in Dubai," she said, standing by the door with her luggage. "You can keep the apartment, the furniture, everything. I don't want anything that would remind me of this. Of what? Jake asked. Of the man who loved you? Of the sacrifices made for your benefit? Of the life you're throwing away for money? Maria's composure finally cracked. Of feeling trapped. Of being grateful for scraps. Of pretending that love is enough when it's not. Love doesn't pay student loans, Jake. Love doesn't open career doors. Love doesn't give you the life you've dreamed of since childhood. The words hung in the air like poison. Jake stared at his wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in their entire relationship. Maria wasn't just leaving him for another man. She was rejecting everything he represented, everything he had given, everything he was. I see, Jake said quietly. Thank you for being honest. Finally. Maria picked up her suitcases and headed for the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, perhaps waiting for Jake to beg her to stay, to fight for their marriage, to promise her things he could never deliver. Instead, Jake sat perfectly still at the table, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. Goodbye, Jake, Maria said softly. Goodbye, Maria. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that sounded like the end of the world. Jake sat alone in the apartment for 3 hours after Maria left, staring at the evidence of her infidelity scattered across their dining table. The photographs showed a woman who looked like his wife but acted like a stranger. The bank statements revealed financial deceptions that went back months. But it was Maria's final words that echoed in his mind. Love wasn't enough. The sacrifices he had made weren't enough. He wasn't enough. Had never been enough. Would never be enough to satisfy a woman like Maria. Jake began to drink that night. Not socially, not casually, but with the methodical determination of a man trying to numb pain that felt terminal. He called in sick to work the next day and the day after that. The apartment felt like a tomb. Maria's remaining possessions served as constant reminders of their shared life and her ultimate rejection of it. Her books on the shelves, her coffee mug in the sink, her half of their bed that would never be occupied again. Jake's drinking intensified over the following weeks. He would start with beer in the morning to take the edge off his hangover, switch to whiskey by afternoon to numb the shame, and finish with whatever alcohol remained in the apartment by evening to achieve unconsciousness. Sleep was the only escape from the voices in his head. Maria's voice explaining why he wasn't enough. Omar's voice offering her everything Jake couldn't provide. His own voice asking why he had ever believed he deserved someone like Maria. The most painful part wasn't the betrayal itself, though that was devastating. The most painful part was understanding that Maria had never really loved him the way he loved her. She had loved what he could provide: tuition payments, emotional support, sacrifice. But she had never loved him as a person. The moment someone better came along, someone who could provide more, Jake became disposable. His work performance suffered dramatically. The promotion he had been so excited about began to feel meaningless. Why should he care about career advancement when the person he had worked so hard to impress was gone? Jake's supervisor called him into the office after Jake missed another important client meeting due to a hangover. "Look, I know you're going through a rough divorce," his boss said with genuine concern. "But you're one of our best mechanics. Whatever's happening at home, don't let it destroy your career too." Jake wanted to explain that Maria hadn't just left him. She had retroactively invalidated their entire relationship, making every sacrifice seem foolish and every moment of happiness feel like a lie. But how could he articulate that level of devastation to someone who had never experienced it? "I appreciate your patience," Jake said instead. "I'll get it together." But Jake didn't get it together. If anything, his condition worsened as the summer progressed. Maria's social media posts from Dubai showed her living the life she had dreamed of. Business meetings, cultural events, luxury shopping trips with Omar. She looked radiant in every photo, glowing with the satisfaction of someone who had finally claimed her destiny. Each post felt like a personal attack. Maria wasn't just happy without Jake. She was happier than she had ever been with him. Their entire marriage had been a waiting period before her real life began. Jake began to fantasize about revenge. Not physical violence at first, he wasn't that kind of person, or so he told himself. But some way to make Maria understand the consequences of her betrayal. Some way to ensure that she didn't get to walk away from their marriage without experiencing any of the pain she had inflicted on him. The life insurance policy provided one avenue for vindication. If Maria divorced him, the policy would ensure that Jake received substantial compensation for her abandonment. $1 million wouldn't heal his broken heart, but it would provide some measure of justice. But divorce wasn't Maria's immediate priority. She was too busy enjoying her new life in Dubai to bother with the legal formalities of ending her marriage to Jake. Weeks passed without any divorce papers being filed, without any communication about dividing their modest assets, without any acknowledgement that Jake still existed. The silence was almost worse than active cruelty. Maria had simply erased him from her life, moving forward as if their years together had never happened. Jake's fantasies of revenge became more elaborate and more frequent. He imagined Maria realizing that Omar was using her, that her dream life was actually a nightmare, that she needed to come crawling back to the man who had truly loved her. But Maria's social media posts continued to show nothing but success and happiness. She had found work with an international consulting firm based in Dubai. She was traveling frequently, attending important meetings, living the life she had always claimed she deserved. Jake began to understand that Maria was never coming back. She was never going to realize she had made a mistake. She was never going to apologize for the pain she had caused or acknowledge the sacrifices he had made. She had gotten exactly what she wanted, and she felt no guilt about how she had obtained it. That realization broke something fundamental in Jake's psychology. Maria had not only rejected him, she had proven that his entire worldview was wrong. Good men who made sacrifices for their wives didn't get rewarded with loyalty and love. They got discarded the moment someone better came along. If the rules of decency and commitment meant nothing to Maria, why should they mean anything to Jake? The idea came to him gradually, growing stronger each night as he sat alone in their apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his destroyed marriage. Maria thought she could abandon him without consequences. She thought she could build her new life on the ruins of his old one without ever having to account for the damage she had caused. But Jake was going to prove her wrong. Maria was going to learn that betrayal came with a price. And that price was going to be higher than she could possibly imagine. If you're still watching, please hit that subscribe button now. What happens next will haunt you long after this video ends. Maria's phone rang at 9:15 p.m. on October 18th. She was in her hotel room in Miami, reviewing documents for a business meeting the next day, when Jake's name appeared on her screen. Her first instinct was not to answer, but something made her pick up the call. "Hello, Jake." "Maria." Jake's voice was calm, controlled, nothing like the desperate man she had left behind 3 months earlier. "I heard you were in town." "How did you?" Maria started to ask, then stopped. It didn't matter how he knew. "I'm just here for a few days to handle some business. I don't think we need to see each other." "Actually, I think we do," Jake said. "There are things we need to discuss. Financial things, legal things, things that can't be handled through lawyers." Maria felt a flutter of unease. Jake sounded different somehow. Not angry or emotional, but coldly rational in a way that seemed uncharacteristic. "What kind of things?" "The money I invested in your education. The debt I took on for your benefit. The resources I contributed to your career development. I think I'm entitled to some kind of compensation, don't you?" The request was ridiculous, but Maria could hear an underlying threat in Jake's tone. She had been hoping to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation, but it seemed unavoidable. "Where do you want to meet?" she asked finally. Jake had chosen the location carefully. "There's a storage facility in Homestead where I've been keeping some of our old stuff. Private, quiet. We can talk without interruptions." Every instinct Maria possessed told her this was a bad idea. Meeting Jake alone at night in a secluded location seemed unnecessarily risky. But she also wanted to resolve whatever financial claims he thought he had against her. The sooner she could close this chapter of her life completely, the better. "Fine," she said, "but I want this to be the last conversation we ever have." "I think that can be arranged," Jake replied. And Maria missed the double meaning in his words. The storage facility on Chrome Avenue was exactly what Jake had promised: private and quiet. Maria arrived at 11:30 p.m. in a rental car, parking next to Jake's pickup truck in the poorly lit parking area. She had dressed professionally but casually, dark jeans, a blouse, comfortable shoes. She was planning to be home within an hour. Jake was waiting for her at the entrance to the storage unit, and Maria was surprised by how much he had changed. He had lost weight. His face looked gaunt. And there was something different about his eyes, a hardness she had never seen before. "Thank you for coming," he said, opening the roll-up door to reveal a 10 by 15 storage space filled with boxes and furniture from their apartment. Maria stepped inside cautiously. The space smelled of cardboard and dust, and the single overhead bulb cast harsh shadows on the concrete walls. "What did you want to discuss?" Jake closed the door behind them, and Maria realized with growing alarm that they were now completely isolated. The storage facility was largely empty at this hour, and the nearest occupied units were several rows away. "I wanted to discuss what you owe me," Jake said, his voice still unnaturally calm. 3 years of my life. 3 years of sacrifices. Over $50,000 in direct financial contributions to your career. Jake, that was your choice. I never asked you to. You never asked me to sacrifice everything for your dreams? Jake interrupted. You never asked me to work multiple jobs, max out credit cards, sell everything I own so you could focus on school? Maria could see the rage building behind his controlled exterior. I'm grateful for what you did, but that was your decision. I can't compensate you for choices you made freely. Freely? Jake's laugh was bitter. I made those choices because I loved you, because I believed in us, because I thought we were building something together. We were building something together, Maria said, trying to keep her voice calm. But it wasn't working. We wanted different things. No, Jake said, and now his voice was rising. You wanted different things. You wanted luxury and status and excitement. You wanted things I couldn't give you, so you found someone who could. Maria took a step backward, suddenly very aware that Jake was blocking the only exit. I'm sorry I hurt you. I know leaving wasn't easy. But I had to make a choice about my future. Your future? Jake repeated. What about our future? What about the promises you made? What about the woman who said she loved me? I did love you, Maria said quietly. But love isn't always enough. It was the wrong thing to say. Maria saw something break in Jake's expression, a final barrier between rational thought and pure rage. Love isn't enough, he said. But money is. Money is enough to make you abandon everything we built together. Money is enough to make you forget 3 years of marriage like it never happened. Jake moved toward a corner of the storage unit, and Maria saw him pick up a tire iron that had been hidden behind a stack of boxes. The metal tool looked heavy and lethal in his hands. Jake, what are you doing? I'm solving a problem, he said, and Maria realized with terrifying clarity that she was going to die in this storage unit, surrounded by the remnants of the life they had once shared. Maria tried to run, but the space was too small and Jake was too close. The first blow caught her on the side of the head and she collapsed immediately. Jake stood over her for a moment, looking at the blood spreading across the concrete floor, and felt something like peace for the first time in months. Maria Santos was dead, but Jake Morrison's nightmare was just beginning. What happened in that storage unit over the next 4 hours would haunt forensic investigators for months. Jake Morrison, the mild-mannered mechanic who had once brought Maria flowers every Friday, methodically dismembered his wife's body with the same systematic approach he had once applied to repairing engines. Jake had come prepared. In addition to the tire iron, he had brought plastic sheeting, heavy-duty garbage bags, and a bone saw he had purchased online using a prepaid credit card. He had studied anatomy diagrams and watched forensic training videos, learning the most efficient methods for body disposal. The process was gruesome but calculated. Jake separated Maria's remains into multiple packages, wrapping each piece in expensive silk fabric he had purchased specifically for this purpose. The irony wasn't lost on him. The symbols of her betrayal would become her burial shroud. But Jake's plan extended beyond simple disposal. He wanted Omar Hassan al-Rashid to be blamed for Maria's murder. The silk fabric was a deliberate choice, meant to suggest a connection to her wealthy lover. Jake kept Maria's wedding ring attached to her severed finger, ensuring the body would be identifiable when discovered. Half of Maria's remains went into Biscayne Bay near Key Biscayne, weighted down but not enough to prevent eventual discovery. Jake wanted the body to be found, just not immediately and not in a way that would point back to him. The other half of Maria's body was disposed of more permanently. Jake used his access to an industrial incinerator at a waste management facility where his cousin worked, providing a way to eliminate evidence completely. By dawn on October 19, Jake Morrison had committed what he believed was the perfect murder. Maria was dead. The evidence pointed toward her wealthy foreign lover. And Jake was positioned to collect $1 million in life insurance money while playing the role of the grieving abandoned husband. March 15, 2024. 6:45 a.m. Captain Roberto Vega was checking his fishing nets near Stiltsville when he spotted something unusual floating in the shallow water. At first glance, it looked like expensive fabric wrapped around debris. But as Captain Vega got closer, he realized he was looking at human remains. The Miami-Dade Police Marine Patrol responded within minutes, carefully retrieving what appeared to be the upper torso and arms of a woman. The body was wrapped in distinctive silk fabric, and a diamond wedding ring worth approximately $3,000 was still attached to the victim's finger. Detective Carmen Rodriguez of the Miami-Dade Homicide Unit caught the case. With 15 years of experience investigating murders, Rodriguez had seen every type of domestic violence and drug-related killing that South Florida could produce. But something about this case immediately struck her as unusual. The silk wrapping was expensive and distinctive, not the kind of material typically used by random killers or drug dealers. The wedding ring suggested the victim was married, but the disposal method indicated someone with intimate knowledge of the body's significance. Within 6 hours, the ring had been traced to a jewelry store in Homestead, where purchase records led directly to Jake Morrison. The victim was quickly identified as Maria Santos Morrison, the woman who had made local headlines 4 months earlier for leaving her husband for a Dubai businessman. The media explosion was immediate and predictable. Omar Hassan al-Rashid became the most hated man in South Florida overnight. Local news channels ran endless segments about foreign violence and wealthy predators. Protesters gathered outside Omar's hotel demanding his arrest. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories about wealthy foreigners who thought they could murder American women with impunity. The case became a symbol of everything Americans feared about globalization and cultural change. Detective Rodriguez was under enormous pressure to arrest Omar immediately. The district attorney's office was fielding calls from the mayor's office, which was fielding calls from federal authorities concerned about diplomatic relations. Everyone wanted a quick resolution that would satisfy public outrage. But Rodriguez was troubled by the evidence. While the silk and ring pointed toward a connection to Omar, other aspects of the crime didn't fit the profile of a wealthy man disposing of an inconvenient lover. Why wrap the body in silk that could be traced? Why leave the expensive ring attached? Why dispose of only half the body in a location where it would quickly be discovered? These choices suggested either extreme carelessness or deliberate misdirection. Rodriguez interviewed Omar at his hotel, accompanied by federal agents and diplomatic observers. The businessman was composed but clearly shaken by Maria's death. "I cared for Maria deeply," Omar said through his attorney. "Her death is a tragedy that I cannot comprehend, but I had nothing to do with her murder." Omar's alibi was extensive and well documented. Security cameras placed him at various Miami locations throughout the week of Maria's disappearance. Credit card records showed purchases at restaurants and businesses across the city. His driver and business associates could account for virtually every hour of his time. More importantly, phone records showed that Omar and Maria had ended their relationship before she returned to Miami. Their last communication was a text message sent on October 5, 13 days before Maria's return, in which Omar politely but firmly ended their romantic involvement. Detective Rodriguez's breakthrough came from an unexpected source: fabric analysis. The silk used to wrap Maria's remains was indeed expensive and distinctive, but it wasn't imported from Dubai or purchased at any of the high-end Miami boutiques that Omar frequented. Forensic analysis revealed that the silk had been manufactured in Italy and imported through a distributor in Fort Lauderdale. From there, the trail led to Exotic Fabrics on Lincoln Road, a small shop that specialized in luxury materials for custom clothing and interior design. Store owner Isabella Chen remembered the purchase clearly. "A man came in about 2 weeks ago, very specific about what he wanted. He needed 2 yards of that exact silk pattern. Said it was for a special project. Paid cash. Seemed nervous." Security cameras from October 3rd showed Jake Morrison making the purchase, his face clearly visible as he examined different fabric samples before selecting the silk. The timestamp placed the purchase just 3 days after Jake had increased his life insurance policy on Maria. When confronted with this evidence, Jake's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. His claim that he had been home alone drinking during Maria's disappearance couldn't withstand scrutiny. Neighbors reported hearing unusual noises from the storage facility on the night of October 18th. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed Jake's truck traveling toward Biscayne Bay in the early morning hours of October 19th. Most damaging of all was the life insurance policy. When investigators discovered that Jake had forged Maria's signature and lied about her consent during the application process, the premeditation became undeniable. On March 20, 2024, faced with overwhelming physical evidence and a timeline that contradicted every aspect of his alibi, Jake Morrison confessed to murdering his wife. But even in confession, Jake showed no genuine remorse for his actions. "She used me," Jake told Detective Rodriguez during the recorded interrogation. "She took everything I had to give and threw it away for someone with more money. She deserved what happened to her." The confession was chilling in its self-righteousness. Jake had convinced himself that Maria's abandonment justified her murder, that her choice to leave their marriage was a crime worthy of death. He showed more emotion discussing his financial losses than he did describing Maria's final moments. "I gave her 3 years of my life," Jake said. "I sacrificed everything for her dreams. When she walked away, she stole my future. I was just taking back what was mine." Make sure you subscribe right now if this story has left you speechless. The conclusion will challenge everything you think you know about love and revenge. The trial of Jake Morrison became a media sensation that divided public opinion in unexpected ways. While most Americans were horrified by the brutal nature of Maria's murder, some expressed sympathy for Jake's position as the abandoned husband who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful wife. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney Michael Torres, painted Jake as a calculating killer who had used Maria's trust to lure her to her death. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged insurance documents, the fabric purchase, the disposal methods, and Jake's own confession created an airtight case for premeditated murder. The defense tried to argue that Jake had suffered a psychological break due to Maria's abandonment, but the extensive planning and methodical execution of the murder contradicted any claim of temporary insanity. Jake's systematic approach to destroying evidence and framing Omar demonstrated clear criminal intent. On August 12, 2024, after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jake Morrison guilty of murder in the first degree. Judge Patricia Hernandez sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling it one of the most premeditated and callous murders she had encountered in 25 years on the bench. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Hernandez said during sentencing, "you have attempted to justify murder as the reasonable response to marital disappointment. You have shown no remorse for taking a human life, no recognition that your victim had the right to make choices about her own future, even choices that caused you pain." Today, Jake Morrison sits in Rayford Correctional Institution in North Florida, serving a life sentence that ensures he will never again have the opportunity to harm another person. In the months since his conviction, he has given several interviews to documentary filmmakers, and his lack of remorse remains disturbing. "I'm not sorry Maria is dead," Jake said in a recent interview. "I'm sorry I got caught. Maria made her choice when she abandoned our marriage for money. I just made sure she lived with the consequences." Omar Hassan al-Rashid returned to Dubai immediately after being cleared of suspicion in Maria's murder. The experience of being falsely accused had a profound impact on his life and business relationships. He established a foundation in Maria's memory that provides scholarships for women studying business, ensuring that her academic achievements would have a lasting positive impact. Maria was a brilliant woman with so much to contribute to the world, Omar said in his only public statement about the case. Her death represents not just a personal tragedy, but a loss of potential that can never be recovered. The case of Jake and Maria Morrison forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about marriage, sacrifice, and expectations in modern relationships. When does devotion become possession? When does love become control? When does heartbreak become homicide? Jake's belief that his financial and emotional investments in Maria's education entitled him to ownership of her future choices reflects a disturbing misunderstanding of what marriage actually means. Relationships are not business transactions where sacrifices create debts that must be repaid. Maria's decision to leave Jake for a wealthier man may have been hurtful and callous, but it was her legal and moral right. No one is obligated to remain in a relationship that no longer serves their needs, regardless of what their partner has sacrificed for them. The tragedy of this case lies not just in Maria's brutal death, but in Jake's complete inability to understand that love cannot be purchased through sacrifice, and marriage cannot be maintained through financial investment alone. Dr. Patricia Williams, a relationship psychologist at the University of Miami, has studied the Morrison case as an example of how economic stress can exacerbate underlying personality disorders. Jake Morrison represents the dangerous extreme of transactional thinking about relationships, Dr. Williams explained. He genuinely believed that his sacrifices had purchased Maria's future loyalty. When she violated what he saw as a contract, he felt justified in enforcing it through violence. The murder of Maria Santos by her husband Jake stands as one of the most chilling examples of how quickly love can transform into deadly obsession. This case reveals the dark psychology of men who view their partners not as autonomous individuals, but as investments that must yield returns. If this deep dive into one of Florida's most disturbing domestic murder cases has left you questioning the nature of relationships and the psychology of violence, you're not alone. The Morrison case continues to be studied by criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement professionals as an example of how seemingly normal relationships can become deadly. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Jake Morrison was a victim of betrayal who snapped under pressure, or was he always a calculating killer who used love as a weapon? Your insights help shape our understanding of these complex cases. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have notifications turned on, because next week we're investigating an even more shocking case. The wealthy tech executive who hired hitmen to eliminate his entire family when they discovered his secret gambling addiction. The evidence will leave you questioning everyone you trust. If you found this investigation compelling, please share it with others who appreciate in-depth true crime analysis. Your support helps us continue bringing you the most detailed and thoroughly researched crime documentaries on the platform. And remember, sometimes the person who claims to love you most is the one you should fear most. The signs of dangerous obsession often masquerade as devotion until it's too late to escape. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and keep questioning the stories we tell ourselves about love and loyalty, because sometimes those stories can be deadly. Subscribe now, and I'll see you in the next investigation into the darkest corners of human nature.